Why you should ignore online literary critics. Do they help you? Can they be beneficial in your writing? Are they just a waste of time? We're going to be answering those questions and more, and we're starting right now. Let's face it, wherever there's an artist, there's a critic. But the question is, are these online literary critics worthwhile? Do they truly help make this world a better place in their reviews of your book or any book that's been written? Should you listen to them? Should you worry about what they have to say? Can they truly hurt your sales of your book? This is a tough thing about literary critics because, as they say, any critic is someone who has failed at the art that they wanted to pursue. They couldn't succeed, so they criticize those who try. And one of those people could be you. And a lot of amateur writers are afraid of writing a book because they're afraid of what people are going to say. This is natural. It's human instinct to have a goal, something you want to do in life, but you're afraid of critics. You're afraid of what they have to say, and it can hurt your feelings. It can make you feel bad. So sadly, a lot of amateur writers don't even start writing because they're nervous about what a complete stranger is going to say. And what ends up happening is we might end up missing out on a truly great novel that would have truly changed the world if that book had been written. Imagine if Margaret Mitchell didn't want to write Gone with the Wind because she was afraid and nervous of what critics might say. We would have missed out on that book, and we would have missed out on the movie. Look at other great books of Oliver Twist and of Mice and Men. There's a tremendous amount of books out there that truly are amazing. Even The Great Gatsby. Imagine if that book hadn't been written because the writers were nervous of what the critics might say, being negative or positive. This is horrible to think of novels that would have truly changed the world not being written because of someone being afraid of a literary critic. When it comes to critics, there are two types. There are good and there are bad ones. In the past, if you wanted to be a critic, you had to be really good at what you did because the only way you could have been a critic is with writing in a newspaper. And those were few and far between jobs. And some of these critics were really famous. They were well known for their opinion because they really studied literature. A lot of literary critics in the past went to university to study writing. So you may or may not like what they had to say, but deep down inside, when you read their reviews, you couldn't help but feel as though they were right or they had a very strong opinion. The problem today is we have a lot of literary critics who they're just everyday people. These are people who they haven't been to Oxford University or Harvard to study literary writing. They haven't read the literary classics. They're just everyday people like you and me and everybody else who just has access to the internet. They have access to YouTube. They have access to their own website. And they just give their opinion on what they've read. And a lot of literary critics, whenever you read a critic from the past, you could tell that they really spent time thinking about what they wanted to say. They didn't just ramble on. They had a point that they were getting to. But when you watch literary critics online today, it's as if they're just making up their opinion while they're just speaking to the camera. And it's almost like it's hard to respect someone who's doing that, who is just hemming and hawing their way through the review that they're making up on the spot. Or they're giving a review to a book that they've only read halfway. How can you review a book you've only read 1/3 or 2/3 of? Shouldn't you at least respect the artist, the writer, by reading the entire book before judging it? There are some literary online critics who will read the first chapter and that's it. And then they give a review. And you can tell by watching the review that they're just making up the review right there on the spot. But some of the most professional writers, literary critics of the past, they would have read the entire novel from start to finish. They would have spent a few hours, days, or weeks truly thinking about what they have read, truly wondering what was the theme, the message, the character arc. And they're able to craft their opinion, their critique, almost like poetry, in just a few columns that they are given in the newspaper. They're able to sum up the book, the power, the message of what the writer was trying to get at. And you could tell when reading it that the literary critic truly spent time doing their homework. But these online critics, they just seem to ramble on while making their video, while criticizing and trashing the book. A lot of them go online and give a negative review and say, I didn't like it. And that's it. They just click off and the video is finished. They don't explain themselves. Even some of the harshest literary critics of the past, when they gave a negative review, they gave a reason for it. A famous reviewer is Roger Ebert, but he reviewed movies. And whenever he gave a negative review, he explained himself. And you could tell by watching, he had a TV show called Siniskal and Ebert, when both of them would give a review to a movie that they watched from start to finish. And if they didn't like the movie, they would explain themselves. You could tell that they had their thoughts already in their head long before the camera started rolling. They didn't hem and haw and make up their opinion while they were on television. You could tell by listening to their review that they actually spent a long time thinking about the movie they didn't like and why they didn't like it and how it could have been better. They did a lot of homework. So that way, when they sat down on their TV show and they looked at the camera and spoke, their opinions were real and honest, but you could tell that they thought it through. They spent a long time thinking of their opinion. So even if you disagreed with them, you respected them for at least watching the entire movie from start to finish and spending time thinking of the review and properly writing it down before going in front of the camera. A lot of literary critics online today, they finish, or they don't even finish reading a book, and then they just click on their camera, they hold the book in their hand, they just kind of ramble on, they say, I didn't like this book, and then they kind of flip through the pages on camera, trying to figure out why they didn't like the book. And if they can't come up with anything, they just close the book and turn off their camera. It's as if they're not giving the author the respect. If you're going to criticize a book, that's fine. I can understand. We all understand. But at least some of the famous critics of the past spent time explaining why they didn't like the book. And they read the whole thing. Online critics today will trash a writer and not even spend the time to explain why. One of the worst things about being an online literary critic is not understanding the difficulty in actually writing a novel. A lot of critics actually were failed artists themselves, and they actually tried writing but couldn't, so they just now are famous on YouTube for trashing other books. They never actually spent time writing a book from start to finish. They might have tried for a couple of pages and then gave up. And it's almost as if they're bitter towards actual published authors, even self-published authors. It's almost as if they're bitter and angry that they actually followed through on their dream. Literary critics should respect how difficult it is to write a novel, or to do anything like painting, singing, making a movie. All of these things are difficult. And in order to truly give a review, you should be able to complete the task yourself. If you're going to criticize writing, you should be a writer yourself to understand how difficult writing is. Because once you understand how difficult it is, then you have respect for the art, for the author, and trashing them by just saying their book is horrible and then just tossing the book to the garbage. It's a disrespect to the artist. So a lot of online literary critics today, they wanted to be a writer, but for whatever reason, they just didn't. They just gave up. And now they're famous for being harsh and rude and mean. And having a negative review doesn't make you a mean person, but it's how you express yourself when criticizing a writer. If Roger Ebert had negative reviews, but he did so in a respectful way in which he explained his review, even if you didn't agree with him, you didn't find yourself being angry at him because you understood that he took the time to explain himself. A lot of online critics today, they just trash a book and they don't explain. They don't understand how difficult it is to write a book. They criticize the author, and then that's it. And it's hard to respect a critic when they don't respect themselves. And because being a critic is just as complex as being a writer itself. Being a critic doesn't mean you just give your opinion, saying, I liked it, I didn't, and that's it. A successful critic is someone who is going to explain why they liked something or why they didn't like it. And they can explain how it could have been made better or different. But when you read a critic's opinion, and you can tell that they spent a long time thinking about what they had to say, and they say it clearly without hemming and hawing throughout their video, you can respect them. You may not agree, but at least you can respect. And there is a difference. The internet has just opened up the door for everything. Now you can have 1 million self-published books being printed every year online. But that has also opened up the door for critics. Now everybody can be a critic. There was a time when being a critic was rare. But now, with YouTube, anybody who has a camera can just give a review to anything they want. But if you're going to give a review, at least respect the author by having a constructive review. One of the problems with critics nowadays is they want to stand out from all the others because there are so many. They want to stand out by being meaner than the other one. If one critic is nice, then someone wants to be mean, and then somebody else has to be meaner. And they all try to top each other in being that mean, cruel critic who stands out from the rest. The problem is with so many critics, that means we have a lot of mean critics online. And they're actually insulting and trashing the author, which is rude to do. And it's frustrating to see how many critics are online who try to top each other, and how rude can they be to anyone who is a self-published writer. They're doing this for attention. They're trashing the book not because they want to be known for being a critic. They just want to be known. They want people visiting their YouTube channel. They want to be famous online. They want to be famous around the world. So they feel as though if they can be mean and trash people's books, then they can become famous for it. They're not really reviewing books because they like reviewing books. They're trashing books because they're using that as a stepping stone to becoming famous as that mean critic. Remember the old saying, there has never been a statue built for a critic. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website, where I have a tremendous number of blogs that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to my website in the description down below, where you can visit my site right now and start reading all the blogs that I have to offer you that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my next video on how being a great writer all comes down to one thing: getting the reader asking questions. In fact, I'm going to leave a link to that video right here, and you can click on it right now and start watching.